and it is my distinct honor to introduce to you the man with the muckrake, a team of undercover operatives, somebody who sheds light not only on this swamp, but all the dark corners of the country. Please help me welcome James O'Keefe.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That was heartening and wonderful introduction. I especially like the reference to Teddy Roosevelt. And I also like another thing that Michelle said. She said the word team. And at Veritas, we have one of the most unbelievable teams of any media company you will ever see. We have some 50 people associated with our organization, not including many of the agents and sources inside of these institutions. And we have the best media team, we have the best production team you could possibly imagine. Our undercover people who don't have a byline are risking their own skins to do this. Oftentimes, they risk fear of humiliation or being compromised. So we have an amazing team at Project Veritas, and I'm here on their behalf today to say a few words about this book, American Pravda. Some news to report this week, actually, last 2 days. The Chief Operations Officer of Twitter has resigned. Seemingly out of nowhere, according to various reports, that's in the wake of a series of undercover videos into Twitter, there was a lack of a prepared replacement for the COO, which seemed to indicate it took everyone at Twitter by surprise. And those videos rocked Silicon Valley and, frankly, rocked the technology media companies that report on Silicon Valley. According to a prominent investor website, Project Veritas published scathing video of current and former Twitter employees bragging about censoring the posts of the politically conservative and a senior engineer saying that he wants to turn President Trump's messages over to the Department of Justice. This can't be good for Twitter stock. Stay tuned. So interesting to see, and I'll start this talk by interesting to see the reactions of Twitter brass in the wake of the scandal. And what's also interesting to see is what they said to the media and how the media reported it. The media didn't really practice any skepticism when they heard from Twitter brass versus what the Twitter executives said into our hidden cameras, which directly contradicted the statements given by Twitter to the media. George Orwell, who I quote extensively in this book, American Pravda, and I do believe that one day this book may be required reading in various journalism schools. Orwell said something that you probably all have heard: journalism is printing what somebody else does not want printed. Everything else is public relations. I call our modern media the political marketing industry. It lacks a sort of investigative edge that was typical in the 20th century. Now, Twitter responded to our videos vehemently by saying, "We do not proactively review direct messages." The headlines in major media, I'm going to quote them. These are mainstream media outlets like BuzzFeed, TechCrunch. Quote, "Twitter says no. Hundreds of Twitter employees are not reading your DMs." Another headline, "Twitter denies claims they are reading your DMs." TechCrunch with this amazing headline, quote, "Twitter hits back again at claims that its employees are monitoring DMs." So the media is just blindly reporting what they're being told on the record, when a dozen engineers off the record are saying the exact opposite. And this is my favorite media comment from the Twitter investigation. BuzzFeed reporter Charlie Warner wrote, quote, "Twitter disputes the claim from O'Keefe's video today." Well, it wasn't my claim. It was the senior network security engineer, not a low-level IT guy. He's the senior network security engineer who said, and I quote, this is the senior network security engineer, not O'Keefe, quote, "We have hundreds of engineers at Twitter who look at dick pics," unquote. I didn't say that. I didn't create the quote, but O'Keefe claims, and journalism has become a kind of perversion. It's become a joke. And there was this interview with Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you've seen it. You should watch it. And it has 5 million views on YouTube. And he exposes the false dichotomies, putting words into people's mouths, creating false narratives. It's become a joke. And the only way that we can circumvent the joke is through the power of cinema verite. That is the Latin word for truth, to expose the imagery of our society. And images have a power to transfix in a way that words don't, in a way that reason doesn't. So that's what this book, American Pravda, is all about. To quote Michael Goodwin of the New York Post, who wrote a great review of the book on Sunday, he said that he actually changed his mind, Michael Goodwin reported, about me and about what we do. He said, "This gets me to another reason for my changing view of Veritas, of James O'Keefe. The reprehensible conduct of so-called legitimate news organizations. They too are guilty of deception by pretending to offer straight news when they function like propaganda outlets." What is Goodwin saying there? He's saying the real deception is not in what we do. We use an alias to build trust with somebody, to draw them out, to film a conversation. The real deception is passing along information to the consumer that is not itself true, like those Twitter headlines I just reported to you are not grounded in reality. And that's not necessarily for political reasons. Sometimes it's economic reasons, because it's not safe to rock the boat. And that's not a right-wing philosophy. Noam Chomsky wrote a whole book called Manufacturing Consent about that very thing. And I quote him in this book. So, they may criticize our ethics. That's the number one thing you will hear and read about me in this city. But falsehoods spread from the podium and from those who speak on the record. And that oftentimes creates a far more pernicious effect on society. When journalists do not challenge what they are told, where is the virtue in passing along that information? Is that not deception? Is that not worse for our democracy than in challenging what people tell us? So we go undercover. Why? Because we want to tell the truth to our audience. That is the most important virtue. And that's why these tactics are justifiable. False speech to an individual can paradoxically produce truth to the masses. Deception in an instance can replace coercion to the masses, because truth to the masses is the most paramount thing in journalism. They'll say, "Well, O'Keefe, you're not a journalist." Okay, call me SpongeBob SquarePants, or Captain Kangaroo, or a meat popsicle. It doesn't matter what you call me, it matters what we do. Journalism is an activity, not an identity. You are what you repeatedly do. Journalism is a way of being. And by any measure, Project Veritas has had just as many results in the last 15 years than any journalist in the 21st century. Voter ID laws passed, election officials resigning, CEO of NPR resigning, Medicaid workers resigning, workers being retrained, fired. Both houses of Congress, democratically controlled houses of Congress, defunded a federal organization. I don't even think the Republicans can do that. But why? Because video transfixes. Video builds a moral consensus. We patrol the boundaries of the moral order, testing and affirming what is not an outrage to that order. So they say you're not a journalist. But I say it's a way of being. Said one undercover journalist, Gunter Wallraff. We dug deep in this book and tell a lot of stories. He says the task is to deceive in order not to be deceived. To break the rules of the game, and we do break rules at Project Veritas, the rules of the journalism gods, in order to disclose the secret rules of power. Said another 20th century muckraker, quote, "The journalist's job is to bribe, to seduce, to lie, to get through the palace guard, to break through the palace guard." Upton Sinclair was hated in his day, hated by the New York media, so much so that he had to open a press office for 6 months and do nothing but battle the journalist who hated his guts. History remembers him fondly. They say, "O'Keefe, you have an agenda." Upton Sinclair had a much far bigger agenda than I did. He cared about workers' rights. So it's not about the techniques, not in the abstract it isn't. It's about whose side you're perceived to be on. And when I say it's really about the facts. Journalists have posed as janitors, school teachers, longshoremen, secret shoppers. We've posed as pimps, hookers, terrorists, drug dealers, rape victims, rapists, child abusers, child victims, terrorists, Russian drug mafia smugglers. We've done almost anything you can imagine, and those are the only ones you know about. Those are the only ones you know about. The Chicago Sun-Times bought a bar called the Mirage and ran it for an entire year and mic'd up the room. That's far, far more than we've ever done. They were denied a Pulitzer Prize by Ben Bradley because of how elaborate the deception was. So the use of a concealed tape recorder, and this is according to some ethicists, at least when one party is present, is not nearly the moral quandary they would have us believe. Really, it's not an invasion of privacy. You're talking to a stranger. He could write down what you say and walk out of the room. It's not an act of deception. It's not a form of eavesdropping, at least when one party is present. And it doesn't constitute entrapment, because we're not the government. We can't get people to say things they otherwise wouldn't say. I don't put words into my mouth. With the Acorn story, they were literally saying, I made their lips move using CGI. I was using a borrowed copy of Final Cut Pro on my MacBook. I didn't have the ability, but that's what people say because they can't accept the reality. They can't accept the truth. So we think that what we do is not just ethical, it's necessary. But it's not about the techniques. Not in the abstract, it isn't. It's about something deeper. The framers of this country created a government that exists only with the consent of the governed. But that consent must be informed, not manufactured. We at Veritas have this vision, have this creed that is not the same as many people in media. What we believe in is we believe in the power of free people, that if they're given the basic facts about the world they live in, they will make the right decisions. It's that simple. We want them to trust their senses. The founders of journalism and the founders of public communications, Walter Lippmann, Edward Bernays, who wrote a book called Propaganda, and those types of people believe that the average man is too stupid to trust their senses. And in this way, we sort of have a synergy with the president, Donald Trump. We believe that people ought to trust their own senses. We believe that we should circumvent the media. The media has become vulgar and silly. It definitely has. Michelle Malkin pointed out the Cosmopolitan newspaper. There's a lot more where that came from. Just the Chiron on CNN said S-hole for an entire week, constantly. It didn't stop. But that's because the people who own them, as Chesterton said, are vulgar and silly. Jeff Zucker, we caught a hidden camera recording of one of his producers saying, it's all about the ratings. He told us to focus on the ratings and focus on the money. So it's not the fact that journalists are bad people. Frankly, I don't even think many of the low-level journalists are bad journalists. It's just they're part of a system which Noam Chomsky called a system of production, a system that carries out a system-supportive propaganda function by reliance on market forces. A lot of it's economics, this manufacturing of consent. And journalists also move in packs. Shane Smith of Vice, it's like soccer players on a field moving together, chasing the ball. I call it blackbirds on a telephone wire. They move together. And we challenge that narrative by putting out information. You want to talk about S-hole? Let's talk about Twitter. You want to talk about healthcare? Let's talk about Acorn. But that's what muckrakers are supposed to do. They're supposed to challenge the orthodoxy. So one of the people on my board, Matt Tierman, has a great quote, son of a dissident in Poland. He says, the quality of the revolutionary is inversely proportional to the system he fights against. The more oppressive and cruel the system, the more heroic and self-sacrificing the revolutionary, or in this case, the journalist. Katie Couric won a Cronkite Journalism Award for asking Sarah Palin what newspapers she reads. One of our undercover reporters, Allison Mass, had to appeal in federal court in this city yesterday against Bob Kramer, who is personally close with the president, or President Obama, met with President Obama 47 times inside the White House. 47 times. Very powerful guy. He has clients, including the Tides Foundation, including the teachers' unions, which Allison herself went undercover to investigate. And she goes into federal court because he resigned at the height of the election. And President Trump mentioned her videos in the presidential debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. I don't even think Katie Couric accomplished that. And he resigned, Fogle resigned, the videos became the #1 most trending videos in the world. He even forced Anderson Cooper to say what you see in the videos is deeply troubling. And did she get a journalism award? No, she's in federal court. I don't even think many people in this room knew that. That's what we face. That's David versus Goliath. That's truth to power. And I say shame on these journalists for not giving her the credit that she deserves. I could go on, but I'll just summarize because the book does it better than I could, or better than I can right now. We tell stories about people being detained at the border, our journalists being asked who we're voting for and what we're working on, stories where they go through our phones and say, I'd like to see, and I say, well, I'm a journalist. No, you're not a journalist. You don't work for the New York Times. I say, but I've got sources on my phone. They said, let me open your phone and I'll arrest you. This is what people said to me. at the border. Our own government tried to have me arrested because I wouldn't show them my sources and methods. So language matters, ladies and gentlemen. Definitions matter. Identities have become part of the establishment, and they matter. It's the difference between freedom and jail. Information, false, true versus false. They've detained me at the border 12 times because I embarrassed Department of Homeland Security. There are so many stories. There are so many war stories. Criminal grand jury subpoenas in the dead of night in New Hampshire. Our colleagues being threatened by power on a daily basis. The attorney generals of New York and California right now are coming after us. Right now. But there will be no Columbia Journalism Review op-eds about truth to power, apples and bananas. What is an apple? What is a banana? Democracy dies in darkness. There will be no discussion about these things. You don't need to go back to Woodward and Bernstein or Ben Bradley to find these types of stories. Just look amongst you. Look amongst the citizens of this country and the things that they do. And that's the stories I tell in this book. That's the quality of the revolutionary inversely proportional to the system that he fights against. So video has a power to cut through, to break through, to circumvent. Oh, one more story, by the way. Regarding the criminal grand jury subpoena, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. The Attorney General of New Hampshire tried to indict us. But the people of New Hampshire, after the 2012 voter fraud videos, rose up and signed into law a voter ID law based upon the fact we were showing dead people getting offered to vote. John Funn wrote about it in his book. And the guy's name, he tried to have us arrested. But the people of New Hampshire rose up, overrode his veto. Now the guy's name, one of the Attorney General's name, was actually Richard Head in New Hampshire. Guy's name was actually Dickhead. And the guy in 2016 who issued us a subpoena, his name was Richard Tracy, Dick Tracy. I got a lot of dicks in my life. So it goes on. There's tragedy, there's comedy, there's irony. It's an amazing book. You should all read it. And we believe that, again, you should trust the power of your senses. Now, I have one anecdote, personal anecdote. A lot of people say, well, what got you started? And I tell this story in New York, and I try not to get emotional when I say it because, you mean a lot to me. But my grandfather was very good at improvising and using recycled materials. He taught me that, you can make the status quo do the impossible. You can do impossible things if you put your mind to it. Now, he would salvage neighbor shingles, find old cabinets on the side of the road, unused copper pipe. He was a master improviser. He could take materials and build anything out of nothing. And it was better than the materials you get at Home Depot. More ergonomical, windows that would fit. We would drive around together. He'd wake me up early. He called me Irish. He said, Irish, let's get out of bed and let's go build something. And he would build things out of nothing. And it was an amazing thing to behold. So you can't fix that, people told him, you can't fix that crooked garage. James O'Keefe Sr., I'm the third. It's too crooked, and he fixed it. He did what people told him he couldn't be done. Now, my message for the younger generation is in this book. My message to the older generation, the baby boomers, some of whom have created this mess, is to you. Do not tell us it cannot be done. Do not tell me that this is impossible, because I'm telling you right now that we've already done it. We've already built an army of guerrilla journalists. 5 years ago, it was me living on the floor of my dad's crooked garage with my colleagues sleeping on that floor and us editing videos all night long. Now we have 50 people. And we're expanding. And we had 1,000 applications last year for undercover people, and this year we'll have a few thousand. We're going to do it. We're going to change the world, and you are going to be along with us for the ride. So thank you.